Great. So maybe many of you have heard Moran's presentation yesterday, which was about the visual overview of beneficial ownership registration in the world. So we're trying to be optimistic, at least on that paper, showing that at least there's about 45 jurisdictions that either have beneficial ownership registration laws or will have them soon. But then the question is, and especially this is something that I got when speaking with US authorities, and I said, well, the EU, the UK, they already have these public registries of beneficial ownership. And they said, yeah, but what's the point of having that? You can simply register Mickey Mouse as a BO, as a beneficial owner, so what's the point of having them in the first place? So this idea, which has been done with many colleagues at the Financial Transparency Coalition, has to do with how do we verify information? How do we prevent really anyone from writing Mickey Mouse as the beneficial owner of a company? And so the point, and the paper has many legal requirements and all the provisions. I found that this presentation is better when it's a bit more graphic, so I'm going to go over that in what would happen behind the scenes. So we say it's the year 2025. Hopefully it would actually be earlier than that. But this is what happens. This is how we envision that the verification should happen behind the scenes when a new company is being set up. So let's start with the case of we have a company from Denmark. So we have this Danish company, and they have two beneficial owners. So we have Kathy and Hans. Kathy is from the UK, Hans is from Germany. But now company one from Denmark is trying to set up a new company in the UK. Now, in our idea, they would go to company's house, they would fill up the form and say, okay, we want to create a company. Before they are allowed to go there, and that's really the end of the slide, the first thing company's house verification system would do is first to validate the information. So, okay, we have two beneficial owners, apparently Kathy, and so we want to make sure, Kathy declared this tax ID and this name and this address. Is that right? Does that match any of the records that the UK government has on Kathy? Let's assume that it's fine. They go, again, to the UK Civil Register and to every single UK database that the government has with information already pre-registered on Kathy. Anything that any normal person would have. But at the same time, they would go to Germany. And now the question is, and many times they say, okay, it might be fine to verify information about a local resident, so the UK should have information about UK people, but how do we do with Germany? It's a foreign country, and clearly Germany would not want to hand in all the information they have, all the personal data about Germans. So what we're saying is that you can simply do a zero knowledge proof, and the way that works is that the UK Companies House verification system, and again, this is a system, it's not really a person, it's just like an automated system, would say, so Hans Müller has declared all this information, this address, this date of birth, this name, this tax ID. Could you please let me know if all of this information completely matches your records or if it doesn't? If it matches, that's the case, then registration would move forward. If it doesn't, you wouldn't get the right answer. So it's not that the UK Companies House would know what's the address of Hans or what's his actual tax ID. It would simply say it doesn't match, so ask for him for new information, and otherwise he shouldn't be allowed to register as a beneficial owner of this UK company. For the sake of the argument, let's assume that everything matched and everything was fine, and then the last check, which is just a cross-check whether information is consistent, would be going to Denmark's commercial register and say, does company one exist? Is it still on record in your register? And in that case, let's assume that it's also there. So then we would be going to the second step of verification, which is more on the red flagging and the profiling. And this case has to do with maybe no one lied with information. Maybe all the addresses exist, maybe all the tax ID are real. But the question is, do these people and does this structure have the profile of a normal company? And so in this case, we will assume that there is no suspicions raised. And so since everything is perfect, all the information registered by these people actually matches government records, and they pretty much match a profile of a typical company, of a typical legal owner, of a typical beneficial owner, then everything is fine and we go to incorporation. But only then would we be allowing a company to incorporate. So many times the checks that happen is that we let companies be created, we let them open a bank account and move money, and only when we find that there's something wrong, we will do something about it. In this idea, even we will be preventing the incorporation until we actually verify all of this. Now let's see what happens during the life of the company. So now it's been the second year and the company wants to make an update, and they say, instead of Hans, now we have John White, who is the beneficial owner. Now John White owns his company in Denmark, and so he will be the beneficial owner of the UK company. So company 2 in the UK will try to file an annual return, changing the beneficial owner to John White, and all of this verification should happen again. Many times what happens, and this is what we've done on the Financial Secrecy Index, is that companies and countries only care about incorporation. So you incorporate, and maybe you have to have the right information about the shareholder. Anything that happens afterwards, no one cares about. So all those updates, and many times you can simply create a company, put yourself as a lawyer, as a shareholder, and then simply transfer the shares to someone else. So this process should happen every time there's a new piece of information. So UK Companies House would say, again, does the data on John White matches, and does Kathy's information still match? Because maybe Kathy moved to a different place. And so we want to make sure that everything is still compliant. We would have the same check against Denmark's commercial register. We would again go to the verification of red flagging and everything. Let's assume that there's nothing suspicious. So only then would UK Companies House go and make the update of information. But the important point here is also not about how to update information, but it's who will actually be using this Companies House and all these beneficial ownership registers. Currently, many times there's simply a place where you just park information. You go there, you create your company, and then you never go again unless you have to. And no one really checks that information unless there is a good reason to. In our proposal, this Companies House and these beneficial ownership registers will become active and very dynamic databases where you actually have to do something if you want to operate. So let's assume that company 2 that actually updated this new BO, that's John, they want to go to the bank and they say, I want to open a bank account. Now, before the bank is allowed to open that, and they will not simply check the date of certificate of incorporation and apparently everything is fine, they would have to go and check this public register of active entities. And this would only include companies, such as this one, where all the information was checked, where the legal owners match, where the beneficiary owners match, and where all the filings have been done. If that hasn't been the case, then company 2 shouldn't be allowed to be opening a bank account. And that is what would happen in the year 3, and this is when instead of Kathy, now we have Paul Fake, so you might imagine that this is just a nominee. So now company 2 is going to a real estate broker and they say, I want to buy a house. But at the same time, there's a bank, and this is actually something that AMLD 5 in the EU would require banks to do, is the bank will tell Companies House, hey, there's a data discrepancy. You still have Kathy as the owner, but now it appears that Paul Fake is the beneficial owner, but that doesn't really match with what I have. So then UK Companies House would simply ask Denmark, hey, Denmark, who appears as the shareholders of Company 1? Do you still have Kathy or do you have Paul Fake now? So Denmark would say, actually, we have no idea of Paul Fake. I mean, who is he? So then basically, the UK Companies House would first alert the Financial Intelligence Unit, being like, there's a problem with this company, you should do something about it. But at the same time, Company 2, which is a UK company, would be removed, or at least suspended, from this public register of active entities. So by the time Company 2 is trying to buy the house, and the real estate broker will have to check this register, they would simply say, sorry, Company 2 is no longer in the register, you are not allowed to be buying the house. So in a way, we're trying to make beneficial ownership registers as allowing these registers of companies, and again, this should apply to trusts and to partnerships and to any type of legal vehicle, as making it indispensable if you want to operate in the economy. So many times what happens, again, you incorporate a company in one place and then you will operate in a completely different country and no one cares about what happened there. And so by the time you actually go to the register, there's no more information. We want to change that, and that is the proposal, that these companies' houses or any commercial register will actually start functioning like that. Okay, so in a way, how do we get there? So there's, of course, many pre-requirements to go there. So one of them would be that this should cover all legal vehicles. So as Maura might have mentioned, many countries are improving in terms of companies, but then they leave trust aside, or like in the case of the UK, they leave limited partnerships aside. So of course, if there's one type of legal vehicle which isn't covered, then there's not much you can do. They would simply be using that one. Of course, information has to be updated, and we need something like a unique identifier. We now have that, the LEI for companies, but we need an LEI for individuals. We were thinking of different names. This might be like a global stakeholder identifier. But pretty much what that means is that if John Smith is owning a company, we want to know that that's the same John Smith owning a different company or a different trust. We just want to know and be able to relate all of that to the same person. And this unique identifier would be much better than a TIN, than a tax ID number, or even a passport. I mean, there was a case of Pinochet. He had 4 different passports, all of them with different photos, different names, and different signatures. So it was the same person with all these 4 different identities creating companies and trusts. So that's why passports cannot be that much reliable. And another interesting point is that just as much as we have some obliged entities like banks and sometimes lawyers and real estate brokers, that whenever you want to buy a house or open a bank account, you are required to prove the origin of the funds so that it's not really part of money laundering, the same should happen every time you're trying to either incorporate a company or buy shares in a company. Why is someone asking you how you ever got the funds in the first place? There were some investigations of money laundering and corruption where like the beneficial owner would just keep changing. So every time the judge tried to say, okay, who's the beneficial owner now? They said like, oh, now it's John, now it's Paul, now it's Mary. And at some point, the judge said, wait a minute, like Mary has no declared income whatsoever. How on earth is she owning this major company? How on earth did she ever become the shareholder there? So again, the point would be this on the preventive side. So before someone is allowed to acquire shares or even become a beneficiary of a trust, you should be asking some questions instead of just letting that happen. And another point is about disclosing the full ownership chain and imposing some limits on the quality of that and also some limits on the length. Why are we allowing? I mean, this is the case of the UK actually. Even for the FSI, for the Financial Secrecy Index, we consider the UK to be pretty good at beneficial ownership, and we say they have open data because they have this person of significant control register. But in terms of legal ownership, it's actually not good, because you don't have to disclose anything other than the names of the shareholders. So if you don't know who owns a company, how would you ever know who actually is the beneficial owner? I mean, basically it's a black box. You know the company, the UK company, then there might be tons of layers in between, and we're simply assumed to believe whoever they disclose as the beneficial owner. So our point is that the only way in which you can actually verify the beneficial owner is if you know the whole ownership chain. And one of the points of that is not only that you should disclose that, but you should also put some limits. There was a research by a Czech person, Jiri, I always forget his last name, but he found that in the Czech Republic, companies involved in government procurement, so companies that get in government contracts, there were 20 layers between the company and the beneficial owner. Why on earth are we allowing that? So now we're like, it's completely free for anyone just to create layers. I mean, they just have to pay lawyers or registration fees. But for authorities, it becomes almost impossible to know who's really on the top. Just because the more layers you add, then the more difficult it is to actually know who's behind it. So those are some of the ideas and some of the requirements that we're imposing. I mean, there's many more, and the paper has them, but that's the idea on how to verify beneficial ownership information. Thank you.
Thank you, Andres. Our next speaker is Chris Jones. He's a professor of economics at Aston University, and we'll talk about the use of tax havens by multinationals in the UK.
Just check how this works. Okay, thanks very much. So yes, I'm Chris Jones. I'm from Aston University.